test taking, retaining information, focusing, not just guessing at the answer. These are some of the concerns that we're going to be talking about today for children who learn differently and who may be struggling with learning. So, an inquiry from a parent talks about concerns with her child's being able to take tests, uh, recall information for those tests, not just to recall it, but then to be able to use it, difficulty focusing, working out the solution to an answer and not just randomly guessing at the answer or the word, um, struggling with confidence, with patience, with being able to express themselves without getting frustrated. Um, and also concerns about their inability to take initiative to ask for help. And then finally, confidence to speak up in front of class. So, a myriad of concerns here, all of which are connected to underlying cognitive processes, which could be very well be causing the issues. So here's how we might think about some of these concerns. So, taking tests, there are, of course, a number of things that might be going on for kids who struggle with taking tests. One is just pure test anxiety. Some of us do better, some of us remain calmer. But tests, especially when we perceive them as being really important or we think they're going to be pretty challenging, tend to be very stressful. And our bodies react to stress from test taking the same way they would react to stress from being in a fight, or a stress from being chased by somebody, or stress from being, threatened in some way. So physical threats and emotional, psychological threats both cause our bodies to react in that fight or flight mode. And part of what happens in our bodies during fight or flight is that our cognition is tamped down. We cannot think as well. We just don't. Our bodies direct all of our physical resources to being able to run, to fight, to do things like that. And less important um, processes are slowed down, including digestion, or and cognition happens to be part of that too. So we just don't think as well or as clearly. So that compounds the anxiety of taking a test and compounds the difficulty we may have taking a test and remembering information because our minds are just not in full cognitive mode, if you will. Retaining information learned. So that's another aspect, of course, of test taking. If we're asked to retrieve information for being tested on our knowledge, we may or may not have learned it, or we may have learned it and have difficulty recalling it, which is really amounts pretty much to the same thing. Um, and memory skills are something that we have seen a real decline in following the pandemic, both for verbal information and for visual information. So we're seeing lots of kids these days have difficulty retrieving and recalling information, even more than we ever had before. But one of the things that we would want to investigate here is whether this child has stronger visual or verbal memory, if they have one that's stronger than the other. And that is the case for most kids, in fact. Then we want to be able to identify which one it is so that we can actually help them with strategies. So if our verbal memory is stronger than visual memory, we want to put things into words. We want to summarize things, ask the child to restate something in their own words, take notes and maybe highlight key parts of those notes. Something that's language based is going to be easier for them to remember. On the other hand, a child who has stronger visual memory, we're going to want to help them with charts, graphs, images, pictures, diagrams, something that is visual that they can easier for their minds to hold on to so they can picture it. Maybe it's even a formula, but being able to see that in their minds when they need to retain it and retrieve it. Then we also have some situations where we have weaknesses in memory in general. And of course, that's really tough going for kids who have difficulty remembering information, memorizing information. And when that's the case, we're going to want to really focus on what I refer to as multisensory content. Sometimes if we think about it from the teaching perspective, it's multimodal instruction. So we're providing a chance for the learner to experience the information and the content through multiple senses. So they were hearing it, they're seeing it, they're speaking it, they're maybe manipulating it, creating a model or something like that. So those are some things that we're really going to work on to help reduce that test anxiety, because we're better prepared, and also just in general be able to remember information. Focus. If you have an issue with focus, that could also be have a real impact on test taking. If you can't sustain your focus and you goes wandering off to the butterfly outside or the squirrel in the tree and things like that, or even just the kid next to you taking the test, of course, that's going to impact test taking a lot. Not just guessing at the answer or the word. So it sort of sounds like, well, I just think my child might be, giving up too easily. He's just guessing. He's sort of lazy. He's not taking the time to really work out the answer or work out the word. It may be that, but most likely it's probably not. Most likely that guessing at a word or guessing at the answer and just doing, just marking that answer without a lot of thought actually reflects impulsivity or the lack of what's called inhibitory control. So inhibitory control is one of three executive functions: inhibitory control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. And inhibitory control, which is the same mental process we use to stop ourselves from, punching someone in the nose if we get mad at them, but it's also what keeps us from blurting something out, coming out with a word that has nothing to do with what we're reading, and also just, guessing haphazardly at something where we just are trying to get the answer and we, act before we can think about it. The last couple of things, well, actually, I'm going to mention another one too. I'm going to talk about patience. So what patience can reflect a lot of things as well. It could reflect a lack of inhibitory control, right? So we're not going to wait. We're not going to be patient. We're not going to contain ourselves until we have thought through something. We're going to be impulsive. So that could be an aspect of it. But patience also incorporates and often reflects another underlying cognitive process that is timing and rhythm. So timing and rhythm is what allows us to manage and pace ourselves over a period of time so that we can be confident that we're going to be successful in accomplishing the activity or the project or the assignment or the task or whatever it is that we're working on. And again, just like all these other cognitive skills that we've talked about, we can improve timing and rhythm. And it's interesting that often in the words, when those skills are built up, when timing and rhythm is stronger and children can work at a more consistent pace, they themselves often refer to it as patience. They say, I did used to be impatient. I would just, race through something rather than managing my pace, rather than working at a consistent rate. And so that's very often something that we see. And, when we can connect it to that underlying process, then we know a lot more about how we can help that student become better at being patient. Taking the initiative to ask for help. This is a really interesting one to me. Oh, usually when kids don't ask for help, we assume that they know they need help. But actually, that's not always the case. There are lots of times when kids can't even express what it is they don't get. They just don't get it. And they can't figure out why. They can't explain why. If they could, they probably would and be asking for help. But the fact of the matter is, they don't know where those stumbling blocks are. So, but with practice and with a greater understanding of what their cognitive strengths and weaknesses are, they themselves can get much better at figuring out where they need help. And then, of course, we need to encourage them to do the asking. A lot of kids are reluctant to raise their hand or to admit they don't understand something. And I always encourage them to go ahead and ask that question, because what I tell them is there are going to be a whole bunch of your classmates who are going to be so grateful to you that you asked that question, because many of them probably have that question too, and they don't want to ask. So you're going to be the hero of the day if you ask that question, and you'll be very glad you did, and your classmates will be as well. And hopefully the teacher will be. It's no teacher really wants to go marching on through the material with a classroom full of students who are going, I don't get that. They're just not prepared. They can't even follow the train of discussion. Teachers really would much rather respond and deal with it and answer those questions along the way, so that as they build up additional material, it makes sense to everybody and everybody can be on track. Speaking up in front of class. So hear a lot of this from parents and teachers about students who never speak up in class, never offer a point of view, never volunteer something. And there, again, can be many reasons for this. One of the ones that is often underappreciated is processing speed. So processing speed refers to the time our brains take to process information, from the time that we receive it until we give it meaning and we know what it is. So if you think about, remember maybe sitting in class when you were young and having the teacher ask a question. There's some research that I read that says that teachers on average wait 1.5 seconds before calling on someone. Well, there are a lot of kids who aren't processing that information in 1.5 seconds. They might need, another 1.5 seconds, 3 seconds, which is not all that long. If teachers actually waited for 3 seconds, they might have a lot more responses to their, and a lot more participation, a lot more willingness to engage in those conversations. But for a lot of kids, what's happening is that, those hands that shoot up are people who just, sometimes they're raising their hand and then they're thinking about it. The children who have maybe slower processing speed, it's not that they're not thinking about it or don't have really good insights and answers often. It's simply that they don't have time to think through it and to come up with a response in that very short period of time. So what I often suggest to students and their parents who are in this kind of situation is to take advantage of when you doing your homework the night before. Make a note about something that you found interesting. Maybe it's in a reading passage, maybe it's a point in your social studies homework, maybe it's just something stood out to you with one of the math problems. And then when you get to class the next day, when the teacher starts to ask questions, you can raise your hand. So this, you've actually pre-planned your participation, which takes the pressure off of your slower ability to process information. And you can share your thoughts, share your insights, share your experience, which is really what teachers would love to see when it comes to having children and students participate in class. So once again, we have a whole bunch of things that are going on that can all be pretty directly related to those underlying cognitive processes that are probably the reason for these stumbling blocks and for these struggles that this child is having. And of course, as we've talked about before, we can build up those skills. So having these struggles, if we address them by attacking those underlying cognitive strengths and weaknesses and understanding them and helping to build up those weaker areas, we can have a tremendous impact and alleviate a lot of the concerns and the difficulties that this child is having. So I'll post some connection to, we have a free parent training webinar that goes into depth on cognitive skills and how parents can approach this whole concept of understanding and supporting their children who learn differently. So check that out in the comments, and I'll be back again soon.